into a world of dust and sparks.
Good evening, and today we will discuss ways to recruit and hire the right people. So, on average, it takes 36 days, $4,129 for the average organization to fill an open position. 83% of HR professionals have trouble hiring qualified candidates. Moreover, tech advances make many of today's skills obsolete in a matter of few years. In fact, since 2020, 27% of available jobs will be for roles that did not exist 2 years ago. Therefore, it is not surprising that today's executives are troubled most by their ability to find the right talent for their organization. Um, so this particular lecture, let's consider in more detail how these important human resource practices can help. So, first thing we may want to ask is what does to recruit mean? And here's a bit of an insight. If you look at the etymology of recruit, it means to grow again. Re stands for again. Crescere means grow, and recrescere is Latin for to grow again. So, if your employer hires you, they're hiring you because um, you may grow again, and you're supposed to hire people so they may grow again. But what happens if instead of growing you end up hurting an employee or disabling or compromising the health of your employee? You get sued and you lose profits, and worse, you invite divine judgment. So what does recruit mean again? Traditionally, by the dictionary, it means locating and attracting qualified applicants for job openings, and um, etymologically, it means to grow again, right? Um, so we'll determine how to attract qualified applicants and selection, which is a process of screening job applicants and choosing the best candidates for a position. So when it comes to recruitment, there are three types of recruiting approaches: internal recruiting, external recruiting, and hybrid approaches. Internal recruiting is hiring from the inside. External, as it's evident from the definition, it's hiring outside the organization. Hybrid approaches involve using referrals and a term called boomerangs, which we will define later in this lecture. So let's come to internal recruiting. We discussed three recruiting approaches here, and internal recruiting is the first one. Internal recruiting is hiring from the inside. As I mentioned earlier, many vacant positions in organizations are filled internally. About 70% of the talent in a recent survey indicated that internal recruiting is becoming increasingly important in their organizations. Companies use several techniques to ID potential candidates. They look at internal job postings, they look at informal nominations, recommendations by managers who have direct experience observing and working with specific employees. And they also look at employee profiles in a database for your intranet or in-house database that contains information about the employees, the competencies, and qualifications. And now, internal recruiting has some advantages. It helps boost retention. It also helps close skill gaps within the organization. External recruiting is hiring from the outside. External recruiting means attracting job applicants from outside the organization. In years past, notices of job vacancies were placed through online newspapers, employment agencies, executive recruiting firms, union hiring halls, college job placement offices, and word of mouth. Uh, Popular external recruiting sources include social media. Approximately 80% of recruiters today use LinkedIn. Um, then we have online job postings. Companies advertise open positions on their own websites, as well as on Indeed, Career Builder, Glassdoor, and university and union websites. Then lastly, we have school partnerships. Recruiters identify talent through relationships with educational institutions, including universities and various colleges. Then there's the hybrid approach, which involves referrals and boomerangs. You probably know people who have scored great jobs because they knew someone inside the organization. Employee referrals tap into existing employees' social networks to fill open positions within with outside applicants within the organization. So current employees are viewed as good judges of potential fit. So referrals can be used in that cases, and referrers also care about hopefully their reputations when they are referring other people to join a firm. Then we have another way of finding talent, which is boomerangs, as the word probably conjures images of wooden angular objects returning to the person throwing the wooden angular object into the air. Boomerangs are often basically employees who return to their organization. They're often pulled away from their initial jobs by attractive opportunities to advance their skills and careers. Goldman Sachs often has instances of employees who return back to the corporation after venturing into hedge funds or private equity or some other career advancing move. Then comes a moral and ethical question, which is a referral a form of nepotism? Now, nepotism is frowned upon because knowing someone within an organization can give you an unfair advantage over others, or having your uncle, your friend, or your friend's friend refer you to a job opening gives you an unfair advantage over others. If that is the case, referrals are a form of nepotism, perhaps, as they give the applicant an unfair advantage over others, even if it is in the form of information, encouragement, or the security of knowing someone already within the organization, or an invitation to apply for a role which other applicants may not get. However, nepotism and referrals, though they are a vice for marginalized groups, they're the primary method of propagation for the establishment, whose aim is to aggrandize because they are a chosen people for one reason or another, but mostly because they are quote unquote beloved by God. So recruitment and how to attract qualified um, applicants involves finding out a good approach to recruitment. And again, there is no best way of recruiting the right people. If you recall from earlier, human resource practices ought to align with culture and structure. Both recruiters and job seekers want to know that the other party will be a good match before they jump into a serious commitment. And just like a person organization fit, there's a person job fit, which is the extent to which a person's competence and needs match with a specific job. Now, higher levels of person job fit figures into better job performance. A fit is important to our discussion because recruiters base their hiring recommendations in part on their assessment of job applicants and their level of person to job fit. And now let's look at selection now that we have covered recruitment. What do you think selection means? No matter the number of applicants, the hiring manager ought to use a systematic process to decide which applicant will receive an offer. And in order to give someone an offer, you must select someone. And let's look at what to select someone means. Now, select has its roots in Latin again. The se part means apart, and elegere means choose, to set apart. Now, these insights are sprinkled throughout the lectures, even though these lectures are just supposed to be routine and to help students who don't have the textbooks to have a better insight into, or basically for them to have a covered material which they could not read in their textbooks. Now, however, despite that, we do have some insights embedded within the lectures, and this is the second insight. Hopefully, it brings us to the historical meaning of being set apart or elected or being chosen. Right. So, the foundational text of Western civilization says, "What does it mean to be selected? It says, "For you are a people holy to the Lord your God. Out of all the peoples on the face of the earth, the Lord has chosen you to be his treasured possession." So there's a tradition of being chosen, being selected, right? And why would somebody do something like that? The reasoning given is the Lord said to Moses, "Say to the Israelites, any Israelite, his children is to be put to death. So set yourselves apart to be holy, for I am the Lord your God." So essentially, selection and the act of setting people apart has to do with moral reasons. Basically, you set people apart because you find them morally appropriate and morally pleasing. So this has been mentioned throughout the text. If examples are given here of immoral sexual relations put to death, and such civilizations are ended. Basically, it says, "And where I am bringing you to live may not vomit you out. You must not live according to the customs of the nations." And these customs, by the way, are immoral relations, unkindnesses, sacrificing your children, just brutal, savage things that people used to do, which were condemned by modern civilization and modern religions, or rather, the intrinsic innate religion, right? "You must not live according to the customs of the nations I'm going to drive out before you, because I said to you, you will possess the land. I will give it to you as an inheritance, a land flowing with milk and honey." Essentially, the process of selection has to do with historically picking a people who are morally adept and who are willing to do things that previous nations could not do, good things, and to abstain from acts which previous nations used to do. Incidentally, as you can see, being set apart has other historical roots, and it is the foundation of the apartheid movement in South Africa. Apartheid essentially means to be set apart. Where European settlers were warned not to embrace the customs of the animists of the region when they settled there, and to basically set themselves apart from those people. Unfortunately, the South Africans did not follow through with that, and we know what happened to South Africa after that. Now, when it comes to selection, the definition in the dictionary means to set someone apart. It is very similar, and we've gone over the analogical historical meaning and the theological underpinnings of selection, right? When it comes to hiring people, it is essentially the process of choosing the best candidate for a position. Now, legally speaking, what we're required to do when we're using selection tools is we're asked to make sure that the selection devices should only be used to measure factors that are directly related to job performances and not non-job related factors, right? So that's like a legal requirement. Now, unfortunately, it is a little too easy to circumvent this law. Anyone who has interviewed for a job will know that if someone does not want to hire you for non-job related performance pertinent reasons, this law may not stop them, and they are likely to find other reasons. Why? Because it's really easy to circumvent this. And so what is the solution? Perhaps the solution is that we want to avoid using jobs alone as compensatory measures in affirmative action programs, and we may want to ask for real racial equality as opposed to merely financial equality and merely giving people quote unquote opportunities, right? Now, there would be three types of selection tools that we will go over: background information, running a background check, interviewing the candidates, and employment tests. These are all tools used by employers, and we will go into detail about each one of them in the following slides. So the first one is background information. Applicant forms and resumes provide organizations with basic background information about job applicants, such as education, work history, certifications, and citizenship. Unfortunately, it has a drawback. 79% of job applicants, unfortunately, lie on their applications and on their resumes, and application forms and resumes don't always provide useful information. And the background checks can also lead to discrimination, something that the legal circles are working to remedy. Now, when it comes to interviews, Basically, the interview is the most commonly used employee selection technique in organizations. Unstructured interviews gather information about job candidates without the use of a fixed set of questions or a systematic scoring procedure. This, of course, is most susceptible to bias, right? And structured interviews involve asking each applicant the same questions and comparing the responses to a standardized set of answers, right? So situational interviews that fall um, under structured interviews would be uh, there are basically structured interviews during which raters ask applicants how they would behave in a hypothetical job situation. An example would be, what would you do if you saw two coworkers arguing loudly, right? This is like a typical situational interview question. The next subcategory under structured interviews is behavioral description. This is a kind of a structured interview during which an interviewer may explore an applicant's job-related past behavior. For example, they might ask you, give me an example of a time when you had to learn more about competitors and what actions did you take, etc., etc. Now, then comes employment tests. Now, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission views any employer-based or employer-imposed employment requirements to be a test, including application forms, reference checks, and job interviews. And there's some additional tests that employers subject their employees to. These tests are basically testing ability, performance, personality, integrity, and other different aspects that we will go over. These are the 6 different types of employment tests that some employers may, for example, use. The first one is an ability test. Ability tests measure a job candidate's physical ability, strength and stamina, mechanical ability, mental abilities, and clerical abilities. For example, intelligence and cognitive tests are popular for predicting executive performance, apparently. So the next one is a performance test. So performance tests are or skill-based tests measure performance on actual job tasks. So so-called job tryouts, for example, for example, you will have engineers who will do a particular engineering problem, or middle managers, they work on a sample project. Some companies use assessment centers, and others basically subject the candidate to participation in a series of interactive exercises over several days while being assessed by multiple evaluators. Assessment centers tend to be they're considered more effective than ability more effective than other ability tests. Now, personality tests. When it comes to personality tests, uh, uh, personality tests essentially measure stable traits like self-efficacy, self-esteem, locus of control, emotional stability, extroversion, agreeableness, conscientiousness, and openness to experience. So, for example, hedge funds run a Myers-Briggs personality test, for example, right? Then we have integrity tests, which is integrity tests assess attitudes and experiences related to a person's honesty, dependability, trustworthiness, reliability, and pro-social behavior. For example, some tests may explicitly ask if the applicant has ever committed a felony. Unfortunately, we're trying to remove such stigma from future questions. Another example is the law school character test or testimonial, which basically goes over your character. Then there's the drug and alcohol test. Employers have a right to maintain a drug-free and alcohol-free work environment. And we can say broadly that companies are permitted to test job applicants for drug and alcohol use. Some employers are covered by federal drug and alcohol testing laws, but many fall under state jurisdictions. Then comes the criminal and financial background checks. Organizations that conduct criminal and financial background checks generally view negative marks on these records as indicators of low trustworthiness or poor character. Unfortunately, a history of legal or financial troubles makes a candidate less likely to receive a job offer, apparently, which is ironic since the job is more likely to keep the applicant out of trouble, hopefully. So, so much for this particular lecture.
window, open a crack and pull you up
In
into a world
in
of
conclusion,
dust and
thank you for listening. I
sparks.
hope you feel more about
Never
it.
really wanna check to see if anyone's